Professional warfighting is the difference between compliance and commitment. It also requires a consistency and an understanding that people are the Army's most important weapon system. The responsibility for recruiting, training, and retaining U.S. Army soldiers sits on the shoulders of the Sergeant Major of the Army, a job in which there's no training course and where experience is the defining factor. To break down what the Sergeant Major of the Army does, the current state of the Army, and where the Army's headed, I traveled deep into the center of the Pentagon for a conversation with Sergeant Major Mike Weimer, the 17th Sergeant Major of the Army, and the first Green Beret selected for the role. The SMA defined professional warfighting and the importance of an all-volunteer force. He broke down the art and science relationship between commissioned and non-commissioned officers. He shared how his experience in the Special Forces shadows prepared him for the limelight of the SMA role. And we talked about the future, his vision for solving the recruiting challenge, how warfare is evolving from the kill chain to the kill web, how he's planning to retain the right people, and how the integration of special operations in the regular Army is more important now than ever. Take a listen, watch, or read my conversation with the Army's most senior non-commissioned officer. Then head over to our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform to catch up on our entire national security series from Washington, D.C. and Fort Liberty, North Carolina. Sergeant Major, welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
It's good to be here, Fran.
It's a busy time for the U.S. Army, and I don't care what anybody says about some post-war, interwar period. The U.S. Army is hard at work all across the world, and I appreciate very much you taking a few minutes to sit down with me here in this beautiful conference room. I didn't know that we have like 6 conference rooms around here.
Yeah, we do. We do, and they're occupied all the time. But to your point, we're incredibly busy. I mean, we're incredibly busy as a joint force, as a nation. But the Army is busy, probably as busy, if not busier, than what I remember in the height of GWAT.
Yeah. So you took over late last year, August of last year, 2023, and one of the mantras that you've been very focused on as you've taken this position has been this idea of a professional warfighter. You refer to the soldier, the NCO, as professional warfighters, and you said the only reason we exist is to be the premier warfighters the world has ever seen. How do you define professional warfighter?
Well, as an all-volunteer Army, 50 years of that, that's quite an accomplishment. I've had to kind of really think about what that means, right? And, we all join the Army for different reasons. I'm a true Army brat. So I bought into this. My commitment came early. I blame my father and my grandfather for that. But a lot of people, they come in and they're not fully committed into or even understand what it means to be part of the profession. And so I think that's part of the journey that I talk about a lot. Towards the end of our first enlistment, and referencing enlisted people mainly, you start to see that compliance really change to commitment when they start to understand what it means to be part of this profession. Pick your MOS. It's a little different for the officers. Journey's a little different, but pick your MOS, and then you start to think when you see that soldier, and you remember you had them, when you see that soldier just start to get it. They start to get what is in the oath and what that means, and that oath we took to defend the Constitution, and then what it means to put this on every day, and what it means to take pride in your job. That's that compliance to commitment. And that's the piece that I focus on, because I think the earlier you come to that realization in your career, the better warfighter you are at a younger age and a younger time in service. And the only way that happens is through modeled behavior. And that's why those that are committed, I remind them the audio and video's got to match.
Yeah. You brought up the fact that 50 years in this volunteer force, and we talk, as you've explained, this professional warfighter. How does that set the U.S. Army, the U.S. military apart from every other military in the world?
Yeah, I have really good relationships with our Five Eye partners. Really good relationships, and we talk about this in different degrees, but our Army, having gone from draft / conscript, some of our other services, not necessarily our Five Eyes, but some of our other coalition partners and teammates, they still have conscripts.
Yeah.
And so it means something different to them when I say, the profession, when we talk about strengthening the profession in the United States Army, it's a little different. We all raised our right hand for different reasons to wear this uniform, to wear the cloth of our nation. And then right now, retention numbers are pretty doggone good. I don't want to, we don't want to jinx it, but once people get in the Army, they find the purpose and the people worth continuing to serve. And some of our teammates across the globe are struggling a little bit with that. And so for us, when I say 50 years of all-volunteer Army, that's a big deal. We're not a combination of the two. We don't have an imminent war looming over our head, scaring people into service. Mm-hmm. These are Americans that say, hey, I'm interested. We can't lose that.
Yeah. You said compliance to commitment.
Mm-hmm.
I like that term. When I hear you say that term and you define professional warfighting, I think about discipline. Mm-hmm. Discipline's another foundational task that you've talked a lot about. You said, quote, if you lack personal discipline, you lack team discipline. You lack squad discipline, you lack company discipline, and it just goes up every echelon. You've also called on leaders at every level to have the courage to hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
When I think about compliance to commitment, and you said you remember those soldiers, I immediately started thinking about 4th Infantry Division.
Mm-hmm.
It's 3:00 in the afternoon, and you're sitting in the hallway waiting for the word, waiting to be told you could go home by the first sergeant.
Word.
And the difference between compliance to commitment, when we talk about discipline, in my mind, is the guys who sit in the hallway staring at the door and the guys who are looking for work.
Yeah.
Talk about discipline and why is discipline so critical to the development of a professional warfighting organization?
Yeah, so, we all know the saying, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if you take a basic company, and we'll just, keep it simple, take an infantry company, and if, 60+% of your company's weak links, how effective are you as a company? And so it really starts with personal discipline and personal pride, and you can be compliant and still be disciplined. So I think that's important for folks to know. Following the rules is compliance, and there's nothing wrong with following the rules. Commitment is that extra piece of like, I'm all in. I believe in everything we're doing and why we're doing it, and no questions asked. That's that piece that I think kind of gets us across the goal line for the selflessness part that we talk about oftentimes about commitment, because you're no longer in it for the pure paycheck, although pay matters.
Yeah.
Quality of life matters. Don't get me wrong, but you're really in it for the mission and the people. And so for me, on the, compliance is okay in the beginning. I was compliant in basic training. I was compliant in AIT. I was very compliant in SFAS and a few other places also, right? Because you want to stay off the radar, et cetera. But it was really when I had those first couple leaders that really demonstrated and modeled what it meant to serve your nation and be part of the profession, to where I slowly shifted into, I didn't want to just be compliant. I wanted to be committed. That's why I'm really hard on leaders, and that, say, do gap, and your audio and video have to match. This generation, our kids, mine are a little older than yours, but boy, can they smell out a fake. They know authenticity the moment they hear it, they see it, or they don't. And that's really hard to win back with them. And so that's why I'm really, really, really hard on making sure we're living the standard. You hear me talk about standards and discipline often. It's not perfection. There's no such thing. But the striving for excellence piece really matters.
How do you turn the culture to embrace that?
Be consistent over time. Which, to me, the most powerful culture I ever thrived in, if I can use that term, because I think a healthy culture is a place you can thrive, was in an organization that had consistent leadership more than 2 years in a row. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that we struggle with a little bit in the service is our turnover. And you remember this.
Yeah.
The junior non-commissioned officer usually is the person that spends the longest amount of time in that platoon or company or battalion, and they live through those, either first sergeant company, battalion. They live through those changeovers. You're lucky if you can get 2 full years these days. We're trying to work on that, by the way. But if you can get back-to-back command teams that are consistent with a healthy culture that you can thrive in, you can maintain a healthy culture. You can actually survive, I think, I live this, you could survive a less than stellar leader to come in there because you had 4 to 6 years of consistency, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, the turnover when you're switching jobs every 12 to 18 months, it's hard. And it's hard on the junior guys.
It is.
Because they're always want to be responsive to those who come in. And I think what we tend to do a lot of times is every time somebody new comes in, they got some great fresh ideas that nobody ever thought about before, except, 2 commanders ago.
Which isn't bad. Don't get me wrong. I do appreciate, I like change. I don't have a problem with change. My wife would say I probably like it too much, but I do appreciate fresh perspective coming in and a new approach. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's a happy medium there.
Yeah. Let's talk for a second about people.
Let's.
Soft truth number 1, Special Operations Force truth number 1, humans are more important than hardware. DOD right now, writ large, at least the talk on the outside of this building, is that there's a lot of effort, there's a lot of focus that's going into conventional force, weapon systems. Think about naval destroyers, aircraft carriers, Army long-range fires, fighter jets for the Air Force. And we've seen the effectiveness of this just in the last 6 months. I mean, Hamas goes into Israel, and what's the first thing we do? We deploy aircraft carrier groups because that's a forward projection of power. We deploy Patriot missile batteries. We put airplane squadrons forward, and all of a sudden the world's like, hey, these guys mean business. And we as an army, we as a military in America can project force more rapidly and at a greater scale than anybody in the history of warfare. And I say that with pride, and I think we all would say that. I think about this, and when I say, the Navy and the Air Force, by and large, they man the arms, meaning that they have these weapons platforms, and they bring people in to then man these weapons platforms. We do it a little bit in the Army when we talk about helicopters and tanks, but the Army, by and large, arms the man, because at the end of the day, the person is required to seize and hold ground. And when we talk about conflict, it's people who inevitably have to seize and hold ground. Great people are needed to do that. Why is the soldier, the NCO really, the most important weapon system in the Army?
Yeah, so I think all the services are platform-centric. The difference is the Army's platform is its people. And people are incredibly expensive and complicated for all the leaders out there. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You can build a 5th-gen fighter, and you can programmatically set it up for a 5-year, a FIDEP POM cycle and be pretty consistent. People are a little more difficult on the programmatic side, right? But I think it's important. It is a soft truth, and I'm not, creating Army truths, but humans are more important for the Army, period. They are our platform, right? And I love some AI and I love some tech, but there will always be a human in the loop. And so I don't ever see that changing regardless of 2030, 2040 period. I think that will be our U.S. Army model going forward. I'll tell you the piece for us, because the non-commissioned officer is the asymmetric advantage. And, I'm a little biased. I'm a non-commissioned officer. But you know this. I mean, look what's happening to the Russians in Ukraine right now. No non-commissioned officer corps. Our primary near-peer adversary doesn't have a non-commissioned officer corps either. And I don't see the Chinese developing one anytime soon. And so tech and modernization of things becomes that much more important for them. So I think for us it's a happy medium. The character of war has changed to the point to where advancements in technology can rue the day quickly. So how do we make sure that we don't have this massive gap in technological capability with our near peers to actually let our competitive advantage win the day on the battlefield, which is the soldier? And that's why from space to subsurface seabed matters. And so we're trying to find that balance, because people cost more now than they have ever cost before. I think you'd be surprised compared to when you were serving how much we cost right now, from barracks to housing to feeding us to all our equipment. I wish tech would get cheaper. I'm waiting for tech to hurry up and get cheaper. It's not there yet, and so we're trying to balance all of that stuff with our budget constraints, which I'm sure you're tracking where we are with that. And so it's a wicked problem, but I think it's important for everybody to always remember humans will always be our most important platform.
I remember formidable moments in my career, and two of those revolved around coming in first to my infantry platoon and second into my Special Forces ODA, where the very first person in both of those situations that I encountered was my platoon sergeant and then my team sergeant, who quickly, as long as you have an open mind...
Hopefully they were both rock stars.
I owe everything to them.
Good.
I do. And I think in both of those situations, because there's a lot of correlation. A Special Forces team is very different than an infantry platoon, but there's a lot of correlation when you come in as a young commander.
We tend to focus on the differences. There are a lot of similarities.
And I remember in both those instances, both of those leaders took me under their wing and said, we're going to invest in you. We're going to empower you. But you got to be willing to listen too.
Yeah.
And I think by doing so, even though you're the commander, you learn so much from these folks. I mean, both of them had my team sergeant on my ODA had 20 years in the group.
Yeah.
My platoon sergeant had 18 years in the Army. And so to come in and say, I've got a year and a half, and subsequently I've got 3.5 years, you've got to take a step back and listen to these senior NCOs who have experience, they have knowledge, and they're willing to transfer that knowledge to you and empower and help you grow. Talk for a second about that relationship and how the relationship between those senior NCOs and those young officers who come in, who may be in command, how does that work?
Wow. So if there's such thing as an art and science, it's in that relationship, right? That's why I made the statement. I hope your platoon sergeant and your first ODA team sergeant were rock stars, because again, it's not always the case, right? We strive for excellence. There's no such thing as perfection, and again, at scale, not everybody's a Heisman Trophy winner, so you get different levels of capability, and then I think it's fair to acknowledge the fact that we all go through seasons in life too. So I've been a different non-commissioned officer in healthier states in my career over the time. Spent some time as an angry NCO, and thankfully I didn't stay in that state, right? So it just depends on when our paths cross, that experience you have. So, but that command relationship, it is really the art side of leadership. So what I have found over time is the non-commissioned officer, and it sounds like that's your experience with both of those, was you had a very empathetic NCO that was all about making you successful as the commander, because they knew you were the commander, you were in charge, and it was their job to make you successful, because then the unit would be successful, and then we would be successful in the missions that we were all handed, right? That's that symbiotic relationship that really, Jim Collins and everybody else can write books about, but the art of execution and how that happens, it's different in each relationship. I've had a lot of different commanders over my time, and I've had to adjust how I've led as a non-commissioned officer based off of that commander style. That's art. Yeah. There's no handbook that told me step 7 when the commander does this is skip to step 12 and recommend this. That's science. And I think the people that struggle in this space, in particular the non-commissioned officers, again, because you're the commander, I have to be the chameleon to the commander. I gotta have enough emotional intelligence. I mean, there's a lot to this, right? But that's more the art side of this, and that's why I'm really passionate about talent management, because once you go to the battalion and above level, when you don't get this right, it can have drastic consequences on the lethality and real readiness of a unit. Platoon sergeant level, you can get away with a little bit more. But when you have, that's why I'm a big fan of the CAP process. I've been assessed my entire career, so I don't know anything else. But as far as the big Army, it is a good thing. We're developing better battalion and brigade level commanders and brigade level sergeant majors through the CAP program. But part of that is developing them earlier, because the art side of this, it's a little hard to work on the art side of this by the time you're 40 plus years old. You're kind of baked. You're kind of like that chocolate chip cookie's overcooked. You're not putting it back in the oven to make it, you know what I mean? It's so getting left, and this is where PME, we're taking a really good wire brush to PME, to all our professional military education. CSM Harris is leading that for us at TRADOC, because the sooner you can get to young Staff Sergeant Weimer about the art and science of the command team relationship, well, come on. You're going to have a better outcome than the out years.
That's leadership from day one.
Mm-hmm.
I think we do a good job of that overall, and it's nice to hear you say that that's something the Army's thinking about.
Oh, yeah.
How do we really drive this home? I had that conversation with someone well in this building now, but Sergeant Major Troy Black, who I had a chance to sit down with last year.
Yeah.
Amazing
Good
guy.
Man.
But we had that conversation.
Warfighter.
Absolutely. But you go and you see these posters, and it's all about leadership from day one. Leadership from day one. And great organizations adopt that culture. They say, we don't wait until you're at a certain level to then say, well, you're a leader now.
Yeah.
Let's figure it out, because by then it is almost too late. You have to start that from the very beginning, and driving that home, creating programs that do that, and show even that person out on the street, hey, if I join this organization, I'm going to be a leader from day one, starts to breed that culture.
So back to personal discipline. Who's the first person we all have to learn how to lead? Ourselves. Which goes back to personal discipline, which goes back to, am I at a minimum compliant to what the standards are? And then the sooner I go from compliance to commitment, the sooner I really start to understand the art and science of a command team relationship as a non-commissioned officer, right? It's a journey. But if you don't ever learn to lead yourself, good luck trying to lead company, battalion, brigade, ODA, troop, whatever. It's not gonna work. And you've seen it. You see it fail. When people outrun their headlights in leadership, they probably weren't even leading themselves very well.
Let's talk about you for a second.
Oh, boy.
So you enlisted in the Army in 1993. You earned your Green Beret in 1996. Then you spent 20 years in across special mission units. Eventually, you served as the sergeant major for USASOC, and then you were at SOCCENT as well. But the majority of your career has been in the shadows.
Yeah.
And now the Army has asked you to come out of the shadows and take this very forward-facing role. Now you sit in front of Congress and testify in front of Congress. But now you are coming into a role where one of your primary objectives is to be the Army's senior most personnel manager, the senior most recruiter in a lot of sense. How do we manage the force? A very public role. How's that transition been?
Different. Absolutely different. I would tell you, it's been incredibly rewarding. And it's just a good reminder to me that things that are usually the hardest in life are the things that are usually the most rewarding. Well, I'm living that right now, because it has been a tough transition. I have to give SMA Grinston, Tony Grinston, a huge shout out. His experience coming into this seat really shaped his thinking and how he wanted his replacement to come in. And so, it's hard to believe, but I swapped out with Joanne Nauman, I think it was 1 May, and I drove to the Pentagon 2 May on TDY orders to start transition. And I think back
4 hours off.
Yeah, pretty much. As my wife said, pretty normal. Literally, if you only knew the full story of it. But it was that his dedication to ensuring I had a quality transition before the fire hose completely opened up for August with me in the seat, I think set me up for any type of success that somebody may claim I'm having right now. I'm just really rowing and trying to get after it for the Army. But this is massive. I mean, 1.1 million service members in total Army, all three compos, and their families, because that's how Congress looks at it. And that is I've carried some heavy rucksacks in my career. Yeah, that's a rucksack like no other rucksack, right? And so how do you prepare for that? To be honest with you, it's too late. Whatever you've done prior to coming into this seat is how you prepared for it, which is why I really understand why SMA Grinston had us run through a special SMAP CCAP that he ran for the selection for his replacement, because this is going to wear you out. This is like an ultra marathon, and you got to bring your A game every day. You're on the X at all times. Yes, there's a camera right now and there's a microphone, but in all actuality, that's pretty much how it is all the time. Whether it's small group with the SecDef, testifying to Congress, congressional office calls, or one that I think matters, like to me, maybe even more than all those, is when you're standing in front of 50 E8s, E9s at an installation who really want to know the truth. They just want to know, what's the Army doing? What are you doing to help solve my problem? That's the one I think hits me home the most, is looking them in the eyes and being able to tell them, hey, here's what the Army's doing for you. Acknowledge an issue, and if you don't know it, tell them you don't know it and get back with them. But I think that's the piece I'm enjoying the most.
Recruiting's been on everybody's mind, and
as it should be.
And I know as you made your rounds to both Congress and on the Hill and the Secretary, and as well as the soldiers, that has come up in your conversations. In the public domain, there's a perceived challenge around what I've called the propensity and the willingness to join.
Mm-hmm.
I recently saw, and I'm gonna say it, but I recently saw this on Fox News. But it came from the Heritage Foundation, and it was the 2024 Index of U.S. Military Strength. Mm-hmm. And it said, I'll kind of run through them. It said the Army strength was marginal, Navy weak, Marine Corps strong. So Troy Black will be very, very happy about that one. Air Force very weak, Space Force marginal, nuclear capability marginal. What's your perspective on the propensity and the willingness to join today, and how do you assess where the Army is right now?
Yeah, and I'm familiar with the Heritage Report. I read more reports than I care to ever remember, but they are important to understand, because the public perspective matters, congressional perspective matters, and then, as I like to remind everybody, the perspective of the current service members and their family matters also. We've had some challenges. I mean, we've been on this recruiting journey seriously on the journey 2+ years now. Like, this is a priority. General McConville and Secretary Wormuth have they have not mixed words. This is a priority. And I don't want to get out ahead of the Secretary or jinx it, but we're on track to make our numbers this year. Now, the truth, though, is we need those numbers to be higher in the upcoming years, because we actually need to grow the Army based off that global environment we talked about at the very beginning, right? And so this isn't, time for balloons and streamers and celebration. It's, okay, hey, now we need to really identify, which we're doing through an innovation cell that the Secretary and the Chief decided to grow inside Recruiting Command, what's working, what's not, and do more of what's working. And part of that is understanding the American people that we're trying to actually bring into the service. I think we forget that after 9/11, we shut ourselves off to America. I mean, I was in the Army in the 90s, and I was an Army brat in the 70s and 80s, and we didn't used to have ECPs and gates, and I mean, it's a real thing. I don't know what goes on behind there. I'm not allowed. It's a us versus them thing. And so this last year and a half, you've seen us come out from those gates and also invite the communities into the installations. You're going to see a lot more of that. We're America's Army. I mean, wow, they need to be proud of us, and they also need to know that their sons and daughters could be a part of that. And so you're seeing that big push, and I think we're starting to see some of those results. I stay out of the political side of the house. It's a beautiful thing being in uniform. I love it. I took an oath to the Constitution, and it's a fantastic thing. But I will tell you, on the propensity to serve, I think there's some misunderstanding out there. We see from different survey data, it's like, well, I don't want to put my life on hold. I don't want my son or daughter, remember the influencer in this conversation, not just the 18-year-old. I don't want my child to be in harm's way, because the predominance of the information environment is always negative. And so if they don't have any other interaction with a service member, whether it's a commercial, it's a recruiter, or it's just a military engagement from the whether it's Guard, Reserve, or active, from pick your camp post station inside your state, if they don't have a positive, then all they have is a negative. And I think we know where the media space is. Negative sells. Yeah. And so we've got to keep beating that drum and make sure that they understand that it's an amazing opportunity to serve your nation. It's also a doggone privilege.
You brought up 9/11, and I think that really, for so many reasons in society and culture, but in the military, is a defining moment. Right now, there's really three cultures in the military, and you have the pre-9/11, so those who served now, who are at the most senior levels, like yourself and your peers, who knew the Army before 9/11. 9/11 occurred, and they became a wartime Army. You have my generation, which only saw the towers fall, and the plane hit this building, and said, yep, that's what I'm going to do. And I said, I'm not going to go be a war correspondent or a traffic reporter out in Maine. I'm going to the Army, and I'm going to go do something great. And then you have a new generation who doesn't know the war, doesn't really know the war on terror. They were born post 9/11. And your job in this role is to find a way to bring these three cultures together. How do you do that?
That's a good one, right? I think first and foremost, we got to tell our story. We've got to, at every opportunity we have, we've got to make sure we're crushing the myths out there of what the Army isn't. That's first and foremost, right? And then after that, man, the youth of today have so many opportunities. I mean, it's a good thing, right? We talk about it like it's a bad thing. Like, oh my gosh, there's so much competition. We didn't used to have the competition. Everybody just joined the Army. It was their primary or their, and it's a good thing, the low unemployment, the job opportunities, we talk about, oh my gosh, student debt relief. Well, if you're going to do that, then what do we do now? That was one of our things we enticed people with. I mean,
$50,000 bonus.
These are actually good things in American society, right? And so I think we need to be careful that we don't, we don't, turn that into an evil thing. But we as an Army have to figure out a new sustainable model if those are no longer only things we offer. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing right now. But merging the three cultures, ooh, that is a tough one. It really is. I was doing breakfast with a senior leader here in the building the other day, and I really had to think back to the 90s. Post Desert Storm, I came in. I watched Mogadishu happen, and that's when I'm like, hey, I'm that's it. I'm done. I got to get out of school. I can't wait anymore. I got to get in. But we were downsizing. I mean, the Army was changing back then, right? And we were kind of in a similar situation. And I would tell you, it's a tough space to be in when you're trying to merge those three. What I try to do, and I coach this with a lot of leaders, is don't discredit people's perspective, because you're immediately they're gonna shut down, and then you have no opportunity to try to influence them and to crush those myths. And so you got to be empathetic to their perspective. And then I think the biggest thing we need to remind the GWAT generation is, and I use myself as an example, I have a fair amount of combat, maybe a little more than the average individual. I've never been to war. Not war like we're talking about, large-scale combat operations with a near peer. And if you haven't watched the Pacific series lately, you know the difference between go into combat, and then coming back and go into the KBR gym in the KBR chow hall and salsa night on a Wednesday. That is not war. And so I think, and SEAC Black and I really appreciate how he articulates that. The generation we're trying to develop now to understand why readiness matters, so that we never remove the term near peer in the term near peer. This is a potential to change the American way of life. And believe me, I don't want to discredit the GWAT generation, because boy, we did some things for our nation that most people they'll never know, they'll never understand. They'll continue to sleep blissfully, peacefully in their beds, but that's not large scale war, where a whole nation has to mobilize. So it is a little different. I haven't even experienced that.
Yeah. Tomorrow, I have the honor of sitting down with General Votel.
Oh.
And
wow.
One of the questions I have teed up for him is right along that line, which is American society, is the business and industry of the country prepared for large scale near
organic industrial base and everything? It's I guess the real question is, how quickly could we get it ready if it isn't? And then we go back to your technology question, which is there enough time? Can we buy enough time and space to mobilize everybody? That's where we are with the character of war changing with technological advancements.
You brought up the GWAT generation, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, because as you talked about retention and the importance of retention, and you said retention is good right now across the Army, but there are less and less combat patches, especially at the company level and below. That experience, by and large, is also at the senior levels. There's a lot of counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, low-intensity conflict. The CTCs and NTC, JRTC are critical in the development of the force. How are you working with the CTCs, and how are they working with the broader Army to prepare for that near peer-to-peer fight?
Yeah, that is a big push for us right now, and actually has been for the last couple of years. So again, not necessarily late to need, but how do we keep up? How do the CTCs keep up with the changing character of war, like relevant, the speed of relevance, right? So we use Ukraine lessons learned right now. How are we injecting those into JRTC and NTC? So that laboratory no other world would ever put its army through, right? No other army would do that. You're like, hey, I'm going to put you in this crucible for about 20-some days, and you're going to fail, but it'll be okay. Yeah, nobody else does that.
I went to NTC in August in Bradley.
Oh,
yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah,
character builder.
Heat Casualty 5 every day. Heat Cat 5. So I will tell you, pretty proud of what we're doing out there, taking those lessons learned. We completely pivoted from a coin focus to large-scale combat operations and all the warfighting functions associated. So that's important, right? Not just the, how do you make breach, force on force? No, all warfighting functions, right? And then the part that we've done here most recently since fall, it's been a major effort for us with a combined arms center all the way out to Futures Command to Force Com. This is a total army effort here. Is the HICON. Like, how does the division and the corps fit into that, right? It's not just throw the brigades and the battalions in the box and give the commander an eval out of it. It's how do you see to that? And then take it to the next level, which has been our Project Convergence efforts, and just wrapped up our latest one, which was phenomenal. I give General Rainey and CSM Hester a huge shout out for that one. How does the joint force fit into that? Which is what Project Convergence focus has been, right? Because we're not fighting a near peer with an Army-centric, Iraq, Afghanistan solution with just an air cap. Oh, no. It is a joint, the JWC, Joint Warfighting Concept 3.0 and beyond, actually matters. How do you see to that? How do you communicate? How do you sense? How do you decide? How do you shoot? at scale, in an Indo-PACOM theater, which is the most wicked theater we have. So that's the problem set we focus on. We're doing that. Like, I'm proud of the Army. We're doing that right now. So, 1st Armored Division, I was out there for 2 days, and I visited the heavy brigade, one of the heavy brigades out there in the box, and I watched them in the crucible up against a near peer, which Black Horse is incredibly, like, they are really good, and they keep just getting better. And it was really good to watch that. And we don't lowball it. We make it hard, because that's the place to learn the hard lessons.
You brought up Project Convergence, and one of the themes of it is this difference between evolution from a kill chain to a kill web. Can you describe that?
Well, I mean, when you say kill chain, you generally start thinking CT targets, and right? Well, when you think a kill web, think about hundreds up to thousands of targets that are all going on simultaneously in a near-peer fight with a near-peer adversary.
300 missiles and UAVs coming in Israel.
Well, to be honest with you, that's small compared to what we're, trying to be ready for. And believe me, Iran has capability, but that's not the near-peer we're setting the mark for, right? And so when you think about that at scale, and then you think about we're going to need artificial intelligence. We're going to need, you still got to have a human in the loop, but you got to be able to speed to respond. Because again, you might not get a second chance if you can't be prepared to defeat the first sortie. The consequences are drastic. And I think that's part of the evolution of the CTG fight was you could get do-overs.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily get do-overs in the fight that we're preparing for now, which is so important when we go back to commitment. Like when people, you go back to the indef mark, when everybody in your unit was indefinite, you hope their commitment with a capital C at that point, and they truly understand what they're training for to be excellent at. Because this type of near peer, like I remind everybody, there's no more sanctuary. From fort to port to pick whatever island chain you want to be in. I mean, it's real. There's no longer the, pass through Kuwait, stop by, swing in the Starbucks, jump into theater, hang out, get big at the gym, right. Your green bean, your Starbucks, and your Amazon packages delivered. That's not this fight, and that's how we have to plan and prepare.
We talked a lot about people, and in order to fight this fight, it's going to take the right people. Mm-hmm. When we think about retention, we tie it back into retaining the best and brightest. How are you retaining the best and brightest?
Ooh. Okay. So that's actually something I'm pretty passionate about. Not that that'll surprise some of your listeners that know me. It's not just about retaining people, it's about retaining the right people. That's the quality over quantity piece that I'm very, very deliberate about. That's the piece I'm trying to focus. That's why I mentioned CAP and some of those things. So, every 2 weeks I deep dive retention. We've made some decisions on recruiting. We are moving out on recruiting, and we have talented leaders. I mean, crushing the recruiting problem for us right now, the recruiting challenge. I have pivoted to staring at retention by CMF, by rank, literally by grade, because I don't want to wake up one day and try to figure out how we got into a retention crisis. Unfortunately, some of our closest allies in the world have a recruiting and retention crisis going on simultaneously, and it is really, like we talk about it. It is bad, right? Not good for when it comes to real readiness. And so we're trying to see ourselves and know, is it duty choice of station in retention, or is it truly the bonuses that aren't tax-free anymore because we're not, you know what I mean? Yeah. All the legacy stuff. And then how do you measure people in mission? Because if you ask anybody that's approaching retirement, what do they always say? They stayed for the money? No. I've yet to ever hear that at a retirement ceremony.
They leave for the money sometimes.
But that's a true statement. It's time to go make money, right? But that's usually at 15 plus years, somewhere in there. It's usually because the people and the mission. And so I always say, you know, you deserve quality housing, you deserve decent health care, but the one thing I'm really passionate about is you deserve good leadership. Your kids deserve good leadership if they join the Army. You deserved it when you were on the Army, and so forth. And so I'm passionate about the leadership side of this, right? Because in the end, the Army's a tough job. This is a tough career. If it wasn't, anybody could just do it. But you see the small percentage of people that do more than one enlistment. It is tough, but it ends up being incredibly rewarding. Without solid leadership, though, that's seldomly the conversation we're having. It's usually I couldn't get out fast enough because I had a crappy leader, if I can just be blunt. And so I focus a lot on leadership. I know money is important to people. I don't think it's more important than quality housing, like I said, or being able to eat at a decent dining facility, or having good kit. You know, the Army's going to watch me focus on what does a soldier wear? Why are plates still the same weight? Why is our kit not staying up as advanced as UAS? And because again, our people are a platform. So you're going to start see me focus on some of those things. But the chief and the vice are all about leadership. I mean, I work for the two most warfighting 4-stars I ever seen in my life. And they're all about leadership. Because in the end, the job's hard. You remember.
Yeah.
We're going to ask our people to do hard things. You do just about anything for good leaders.
It's true.
It is a true statement.
Yeah.
You got General Votel coming on here. There was next to nothing I wouldn't do, and I worked for him for multiple times. I'd do just about anything for that man. It's because he was a great leader.
I got to ask you about SOF for a minute.
Okay.
So
I figured you'd get it in there somehow.
We got to. The regiment, if nobody's told you, okay, the regiment is very proud.
What regiment? What
The
regiment is this?
This is the Special Forces
75th Regiment?
Yeah, no, we don't know anything about them.
We used to joke back in the 90s. I never heard the term regiment. I left the regiment to go do something else. I came back and it was a regiment.
Yeah. Let's say 1st Special Forces Command is very proud to have you in this seat, and to represent really the whole command across the Army. We've had a lot of conversations about the importance of SOF.
Yeah.
And especially in this period, you know, whether we want to call it this 1939 moment, this interwar period or not, but the reality is that SOF does a lot of their best work. And not to discredit anything that's been done in the CT fight for the last 20 plus years, but a lot of the best work is in the world where you came from that we don't ever hear about in these interwar periods where we shape operations. The OSS, the Jedburghs, the OGs, all of these organizations came to fruition and were concepted in this idea that we've got to do our best to prevent the peer-to-peer fight, prevent conventional forces against conventional forces. SOF becomes successful when you fight through proxies, when we see Iran arming Hezbollah and Hamas, because that means we're not directly attacking and going after superpower nation. Not that everyone's a superpower, but more superpower nations.
I know what you mean.
We're also at a time, though, where we talked about resourcing. We talked about prioritization of DOD and the Army, and this look to the conventional fight. And the Army's been asked to reduce forces. The Army has asked Special Forces to reduce capability, not so much, but reduce numbers. How do you see the integration and the partnership between the conventional forces and SOF in the next fight?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Actually, like how you framed it at the very end there. How do you see the relationship going forward for large scale combat operations? I think that's key, right? And so I'd be a complete hypocrite if I just didn't champion SOF's roles and responsibilities and really like impact they can have prior to large scale combat. That's a real thing. I spent most of my career in some form or fashion building relationships that have ended up being generational. I mean, I can pick a phone up and phone a friend in a lot of countries. Some of them I started off knowing them as, in one country, I won't mention the name. I met him once. He was a major. He's about to be the chief of staff of their army. I mean, that is a real thing. But I will tell you, going forward in the resource constraint environment that we're in, budget and people, we're trying to figure out that happy medium going forward. And so that's the tension that we're living in right now, right? So the Army has to change. To be honest with you, we can't change fast enough to, again, make sure near stays before the term peer. And then simultaneously, how does SOF evolve from a GWAT formation to fit into that time now and going forward 2030 and beyond? And I'll tell you, and I said this, people got tired of me saying it at USASOC. I'll say it till they put me in an urn and my wife puts me on a shelf someday. It's always got to be quality over quantity. Always quality over quantity. There's a certain portion of the Army that we need some quantity. We need some private Weimers. There are no private Weimers on an ODA. You remember this, right? And so we can never, ever compromise on the quality inside SOF. And if the numbers are what they are right now, then we need to man SOF to the numbers we can man to make sure that we have the quality that we owe the country. And that's where I think SOF is right now. And there's no doubt in my mind, if we could have the Army we know we need, not the Army we can resource right now, this is why recruiting is so important, we probably wouldn't be discussing the cuts that we're discussing. But because the Army's got to change, we've got to build multi-domain task force, information advantage detachment. I mean, there's a list of everything that's out there in the public space that they know we're growing. And that capability, it's all high-end capability. And so for the first time, post-GWAT, we're in a tension for the same talent. Mm-hmm. And we're in a resource-constrained environment. And so that's a little bit of what you're seeing. But I go back to my SOF DNA. I don't worry about it for SOF as long as we don't compromise quality. We've accomplished a lot with very small numbers when it was the right people, mm-hmm. with the right leaders, with trust. Like trust. I'll take less people with quality and trust of the senior leaders. I'll take that all day long. Matter of fact, you're usually more lethal and you get things done faster. So, but I acknowledge the low density enablers is where we're really struggling, and I wish we had enough to go around. That's what we're trying to solve through recruiting.
Yeah. It was nice last week when I was down at Fort Liberty and I sat down with the SWIC command teams, Sergeant Major Strong, General Beaupere.
Oh, General Beaupere and Lee Strong. It's a wicked command team there.
Well, and they're really embracing the Army's push and the Army's directive that you're going to stand up this psychological operations schoolhouse. You're going to stand up this irregular warfare center of excellence. Yep. And they're taking that mission and they're running with it. Yeah. And they're embracing the challenge that the Army has put in. And I call it an opportunity to do more with a little bit less. Yeah. And how do we double down on the standard, double down on the investment we're making on our people, but then also bring in the conventional Army to say, look, these programs are critical to the next fight. Yes, do we need to put rounds downrange? Yes, we do. But we also need to influence people, and the influence operations allow us to be more effective in our combat operations.
Yeah. And those two, I mean, there's a lot of people I could say this about inside the SOF formation, but those two, they understand what it means to produce quality. They won't compromise quality.
You've been at the game for a long time. And this, I would say, you've faced a lot of challenges. You alluded earlier, this is one of the biggest challenges that you have. What's the biggest opportunity? And as you look forward over the next 3.5 years that you have this role for, what are you most excited about? Number one, for the role, and number two, for the Army.
Wow, excited about. It has to be the opportunity to reset our focus. Standards and discipline can't just be some whimsical thing we throw around. You know, it's like the term engaged leadership. Oof, that one we throw around a lot, right? It means a lot, different things to different people. Standards and discipline can't mean a lot of different things to different people. You know, I'll give you a quick peek here since we're also on video here, but like this is 2.0 of the Army Blue Book. Not for release yet, but it's coming. And this little thing, it's not magical, right? This thing's not going to cure cancer. This isn't going to make everybody, you know, part of, you know, the 300 because everybody wants to be a Spartan. You just don't want to do the work that's required to be a Spartan, right? Because it requires sacrifice and a lot of hard work. But I will tell you, if in my tenure we can get focused back to what it means to have standards and discipline and a war-fighting culture, I will be tremendously happy with however much time the chief and the secretary allow me to be the sergeant major of the Army. That's my focus.
Last question.
Okay.
Test question.
All right.
It's the real one. We think back, I mentioned the Jedburghs earlier, and the OGs, and the Jedburghs had to do 3 things every day as core foundational habits. I say the Jedburghs had to do it, but it's really soldiers, anybody in the military. But you got to have habits. Elite performers have to have habits. We talk a lot in the Army about shoot, move, communicate.
Yep.
If we can shoot, move, communicate as foundational habits that become muscle memory, things we don't have to think about in order to effectively do those every day, it allows us to think about more complex challenges.
Yep.
Think about, you know, if you go into selection physically fit, you don't have to worry about it. You can worry about the other challenges they throw your way.
Yep.
What are the 3 things that you do every day to set the conditions for success personally in your world?
Whew. Okay, well, I mean, first and foremost is I prepare the night before. You got to prepare the night before. You got to reflect upon the day you just finished and what do you have with the day coming. You have to. You can get away with a little bit when you're a junior leader, but I'll tell you, when you become a more senior leader, it'll expose chinks in your armor. You were not prepared for that day's events. And more senior you get, you don't survive. You don't survive a couple of those episodes. It doesn't matter whether you're a general officer or senior nominative sergeant major. You got to prepare. The second one is, it sounds cliche, but you still got to stay fit. You got to stay fit. And so I do some type of, and it's not always physical. It can be mental, spiritual, or physical. I'm a sleep weirdo, right? Sleep hygiene is a big thing for me. But that allows me to do the second thing, which is get up and do some type of thing for my body, mind, and soul. Some days it's all 3, because there's nothing like a 40-minute MRAP to crush all 3 of those things, and then have a good breakfast. I will have to continue both of those when I retire. I think the third one, and I didn't always do this, is read. You got to read and study. Yeah, I think we do it, unintentionally. You'd be like, well, of course, I read every day. No, I'm talking about with intentionality. And so it kind of goes back to what I was alluding to, the night before prep. Like, what are you reading? There's some things you need to read just for your, mind, body, and spirit. And then you better be reading about your craft. This goes back to what it means to be part of this profession. What are you doing to read to get better at your craft? And I tell you, even on the weekends, I'm usually and I'm a bit of a workaholic. I blame JSOC. I struggle to turn it off a little bit. Raising 2 daughters has helped me. My wife and my girls have helped me with this a little bit. But don't, be inquisitive. The moment you lose being inquisitive to learn, man, what do you do after that? You probably just, you're probably become really content, and hubris kicks in, and you already have all the solutions, and you stop critically thinking. So it would really be preparation the night before is key. Do something for your mind, body, and spirit every morning, some form or fashion. Then the third one is, I don't mean Instagram, read and ask questions. That's every day. Yeah. Those would be the three I'd give you without having thought about it ahead of time.
That's why I don't give you that one before. I think we're at an exciting time. Okay. The Army has evolved over the last 20 plus years.
That's
the
a
Army will continue to evolve.
Yeah.
I believe that there is no truer song than the Army song.
Yeah.
That the Army keeps rolling along, and whether we like it or not, when we leave, that's what happens. But that's what has set the foundation for our nation, and really what's the world order. And our conversations in this series that we're doing revolve a lot around that. Where we come from, where are we going, and what's the vision behind that, and really more importantly, how are we going to get there? Yeah. And so, you got an Army to run. I thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me, and I look forward to your work over the next couple of years.
Appreciate it. It's been an honor.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast, an official program of the Green Beret Foundation. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other long and short form content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow the Jedburgh Podcast and the Green Beret Foundation on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, or Threads. Send your comments and inquiries to fran@jedburghpodcast.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Media Channel and the Green Beret Foundation remain committed to supporting all generations of U.S. Army Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.